Oh my goodness. Yes, because in the I can't remember if in the absolute original rules, I know there was the concept of battalion guns, and I can't remember if in the original rules, way back in, like 94, 95, if they even existed. But I think they soon came along. And then later on, I know the name was changed from battalion guns to dedicated guns, and I think their function changed slightly in some way as well, the way that they were factored into the battlefield. But I'm sort of not used to um, having battles in which they play a significant role. Well, anyway, here we are, and oh my goodness, that rather changes things, doesn't it? That means that the Russian move towards these chaps um, is they're playing a rather more dangerous game, because if there had only been two dice on each one on these, of course, it would have the infantry would have been sort of plinking away at the cavalry, But yeah, and the cavalry would eventually end up taking hits. But now, as we can see, they're rather more likely to take some hits. So, well, we shall see. Each brigade has got a 50-50 chance of causing a casualty on the enemy. Yes. So, okay, well, that's the way it is. Right. So, let's see. It's only for the French. It's only the guard, the guard light infantry that have the dedicated guns. The other chaps don't. So that's what's going on there. Right. So we've talked about that situation. Yeah, and the idea here with the French commander is obviously, hopefully, if these two units can put the boot in on the Russians here on the corner, that they can cause something to happen. Meanwhile, the French commander realized that there's absolutely no penalty to advancing forward. They're not within musket range. They're not within visibility. So all they've done is they've advanced their line forward, and what was the general strategic value of doing that? I suppose to restrict Russian. Yeah, that's an interesting. I think the jury's out on that one. To restrict Russian options, perhaps. I mean, of course, now the Russians, if they wanted to, in their turn now, could up sticks and they could charge the enemy. Sort of like, well, why would they do that? They're in a nice cozy position. They're stationary. In this position here, they're even defending a town. So it would be a sort of 50-50 combat if they did that. But yes. Although I think, yeah, even in melee, they would get an extra die, wouldn't they, I believe, for the battalion guns. Yes. So anyway, that's something to think about. Okay, so there we go. In terms of morale tests, morales have to be tested if you're in melee, nobody is, or if you are within the arc and close range and obviously visibility of the enemy. And the only situation where that's the case, because here, as a reminder, they're within musket range of one another, but they're not within close range. Close range with a musket is contact under these rules. So the only chaps that are within close range of the enemy that need to test are the Cossacks here, because they're within close range of the artillery, and the musketeers here, because they're in close range of the artillery. Right? There was another thing that this wasn't really part of the French move, but it did occur to me during the course of the French turn, and that was that it could be. Well, there were bad options. There were Hobson's choice, as they say, because there were like two bad options. So which one was the least bad? Because what happened with this brigade here, unfortunately, as I said, I backed them away, or rather the Russian commander backed them away, Blucher, who of course is German, but he is commanding the army, backed them away so that they wouldn't be here in the tangle of all this artillery and morale tests and all that sort of thing. But in so doing, because they were out of command, they became disordered. And what was forgotten at that point was that because it's nighttime now, they can never recover from that disorder. So they're stuck with it. So that's not so hot. But I think if they had stayed where they were, they would have been probably destroyed in rather short order. So we shall see. Right, so pressing on then. So we've got to do our morale tests. That's right. So we've got to test the Cossacks here and the Musketeers there. And let's see what we can do. Right, just a little follow-up detail there. I did say, oh yes, let me check that out. I wonder about the if the Russians attacked, if they launched a melee against charge against the French. Well, actually, of course, the first thing is that they're beyond visible range, so they can't do it. They could advance. It's awfully close, but these deliberately stayed back, so they're beyond 200 yards. So, but anyway, if they finally came to grips with the French in a melee, if they charged them, or indeed if the French charged the Russians have got dedicated guns. Yes. So if the French charged the Russians in this situation, it would be crazy for the French, because they would be charging, they would have 6 in a melee, and the defending Russians would have, they would have 4 in a melee. The defending Russians who are stationary would have 6, plus for the gun, they'd have 7 dice. So they have 4 dice versus 7 dice. You don't want that. On the other hand, if the Russians charged the French and the French were still not stationary, it's all a question of if and all this sort of thing. If, but, what, or. Sounds like a programmer, and that's what I am. Anyway, so if they charged them, they would be attacking them normally with 4, because they're not stationary, but they've got battalion guns. So those battalion guns, they add up. They make a difference, you know. Right. And as a matter of fact, to remind me of that, in my little dice tray that I roll the dice into, I came up with well, I suppose it would be like it's kind of a, what do we want to say? It's an analog version of an app, you see. So here you are. French Guard and Russians have dedicated guns. So you literally have to roll the dice into that. So hopefully you'll pay attention to that. Okay, right. So we're going to test morale. And now this is interesting because, of course, it's nighttime. So everyone is down -1. Oh, my goodness me, on their morale. And that could be a serious problem for the Cossacks, because the Cossacks have poor chaps. They have a morale of 4. So we take them down to 3. So that means if they roll 4, 5, or a 6, they've failed their morale and they will become disordered. Let's see what happens. And indeed, they have become disordered. So yeah, let's do that live. Let's take care of that. Oops. Sort of thing. You need 3 hands. Yes. So there goes our disorder marker. They are disordered. Okay. And then we roll up. Now this is the pivotal one, of course. We roll up for the, well, as we can see from the configuration, the pivotal brigade there. And let's see, they start out with a morale of 5, -1 because of night, so they're on a 4. And they rolled 3, so they passed their morale test. Okay. Right. Okay, so we've done our morale tests, and we're ready for the big event here. So we're ready for the actual shooting. Yes, and one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that the skirmishing units, which are being fired on, of course, skirmishers here, the lovely, nicely turned out Uhlans down there, and also the Cossacks here, which are Karpov, the Cossacks there, and the Uhlans are, what are they? Chningev. That's a tongue twister, right? But they only have 1 strength point. So the 1 hit and they are removed, they're eliminated. And normally, if they're taking fire, they get a saving throw for every hit against them, but only if they are separated from other units by a base width minimum. In the congestion here and here, that is not the case. So they will not get the saving throw, which represents presumably their ability to sort of run around and dodge things and so forth. Anyway, right, so down here we've got fully 3 dice going at the Uhlans, and because they've got those battalion guns, it's so we're hitting on 6s, as one might imagine. And we've got nothing. Right, so Jolly old Ulan's got away with that one. Next up, these chaps are firing, the voltigeurs are firing at the hussars here. Let's see what happens to them. Now, they're not skirmishers, so they can take more than one hit. Or rather, it would take more than one hit to destroy them. Right. No hits. Oh, well, okay. So that's 6 misses so far. Right, here we go. Here's the next batch coming up. Firing at even more hussars. Okay, here we go. We got 1 hit. Okay, 1 hit on the hussars. We'll deal with that later. Let's mark that like that. All right, and then finally the voltigeurs down there are firing on the Russian dragoons, which have already taken 1 hit. And no hits there. Okay, right. Well, not much came out of that, even with all those battalion guns in play. Right, so they got 1 shot here. It's close range artillery. So that's hitting on a 4, 5, or 6 against the Cossacks. And you're going to miss. Okay. Okie dokie. Desultory fire. We got, let's see, we got a short range here. Close range, as it's called in the latest book. Excuse me. Close range. Firing away 4, 5, or 6 is a hit. They've already got, is it 1 hit they've got? Yeah, they've already got 1 hit. And it's a miss. This is extraordinary. Look at that. Look at all those blue dice. Those are the French shooting so far. And they've managed to hit with 1. Right. Okay. Now we've got 2 shots coming in from the brigade there, which is Voirol. Okay. Firing away, picking on the Russians. Nothing. And then finally, we have the brigade of, who is it? Mater. All right, here we go. Ooh, well, we got a hit, finally. So there's 1 hit there on the Russians. Okay. And then the Russians are going to fire back. They're going to fire at these chaps here at Voirol. And who is it firing? Oh, it's got a bit of a tongue twister of a name, which I really can't read upside down, but it's something like, Poltodovsky or something like that. Apologies for that one. I'll look him up in a minute. Right. So, Russians are firing. Got their dedicated guns. Let's see what they can do with that. And they've got a hit on the French. Okay. So, Voirol has been hit. Okay, let's sort that out. Right, those chaps on the corner there that have taken 2 hits, Poltorowski's brigade of Udom's division. And it has now been forced into division exhaustion. And what we have to do now is roll a die to see if they suffer morale collapse, which would be the case. They've only taken 1 hit, so it would be the case if I roll a 1, which is not the case. So the morale has not collapsed. Okay, and I've got 1 thing left to do. I'm going to mark that casualty on those chaps. Voirol. Right, so there we go. Where is he? Yeah, Voirol. There we go. He's got his casualty there. And yes, and also we've got the marker here on Udom to show that his division has become exhausted, which means that they can no longer make a move towards the enemy. So these chaps here, that's all that's left of the division. They can remain in place, they can retire, but they cannot advance upon the enemy. Right. Right, now what do we got? So we've done everything. That's right, for this turn. We've even done exhaustion. And morale collapse. We're at the end of the French turn. Okay. What is the situation now that stands before us? Well, I think we can argue that things are starting to begin to swing a little bit in favour of the French. Okay, I mean we've got, because remember, disorder is permanent at night. Those two are disordered. He belongs to a division that has suffered morale, division exhaustion. Okay, if they're hit again, they'll have to roll again for a possibility of morale collapse. So you've got basically sort of, you can think of it as having sort of three dodgy brigades, and then they've got 1, 2, 3, 4 brigades that are in, well, mint condition, basically. Well, apart from there's one casualty there, I suppose, but in pretty darn good condition. And then as opposed to the French, who have got 10 brigades, 4 of which are guards, and so far they've taken 1 hit. So yes, they have lost 4 brigades of cavalry. They've lost almost all their cavalry, but their infantry is in pretty good nick. And as we can see, because they have the dedicated guns there, if the Russian cavalry were to charge them, for example, they would be rolling 4 dice, and the defending infantry, which are not stationary, would be rolling 5 dice because they have the dedicated guns. If they were stationary, they'd be rolling 7 dice. So, bit of a pickle. So yes, for the I think for the Russian cavalry to charge them would be insane. The odds would be stacked massively against them. Well, let me restate that. The odds would be stacked against them. It would be massively against them if they were charging stationary infantry, which, they should just generally never do. Okay, so therefore, what are they going to do? I suppose they're going to pull back, and that means that the French are going to march up to them again and fire at them again. Remember, they're firing at them not with 2 dice, but with 3 dice, so they could seriously expect to be taking casualties amongst the cavalry there. Okay. And then in the centre, as we say, things are looking not looking so hot here. They're just sort of facing off against one another, a bit of a sort of plodding going on there. Here, in this particular little situation, they are, of course, they're disordered, so that means that on their turn, they could spend half a turn getting rid of the disorder, and then they could charge the guns. I'm going to look at the stats on that because I'm not that familiar with it. I do know that you wouldn't think so, but that skirmishing stand gets 2 dice, so it's not so bad. And these chaps are not stationary, so I'm not sure what they get in a melee. And cavalry charging unlimbered artillery frontally sounds a bit dodgy, so not sure about that. But anyway, it's jolly interesting stuff, because I thought once the French had lost, almost all their cavalry, oh dear, is that then? How on earth are they going to be able to proceed? Now, the thing is, of course, is that it may be that the French can sort of move forward and keep pushing this cavalry back and all that sort of thing. But remember, to achieve any species of victory under the conditions of the scenario, they have to, at the very least, cut the line of communication. So they've got, 5 more turns in which they'd have to get down there and, it's not actually defined what that means, I think, in the scenario, unless it's defined in the rule book. I suppose I should look for that. To qualify as cutting someone's line of communication. What do you have to do? Well, I would think at the bare minimum, you'd have to have a unit that was parked on the road, let's say, at the at the end of the battle. Okay, so they'd have to do that. Not sure about how viable that is in sort of the number of turns it would take to get there and all that sort of thing. Not sure. One thing I should mention, because it was looked at in some considerable detail, was the notion of taking Lefebvre Denouette and commanding the cavalry here, the Lancers, which is, Krasinski's Lancers, and just sort of popping off over here and going, they'd be slowed down going through the orchard here and disordered, come over to here, slowed down and disordered as they go through the gardens of the chateau here, which is orchard, and then just waltz down here and cut off the old line of communication. So that was looked at, but the problem with that was that if they did that, it meant that the French left flank was absolutely categorically unguarded. So unless they could close it up with a sort of the edge of the world over here, which would mean spreading forces out a lot, the Russian cavalry, for example, in this turn now, the Russian turn, they could just sort of go, right, we've had enough of this. So they go free facing change down here, and then they go pay for a facing change, half the move, and go sort of down here. And before you know it, I mean, you've already got people coming around your flank. And once they get around the flank, of course, they can just run around down here and charge anyone they like in the rear. Okay, so and that would definitely, kind of ruin the Emperor's day. Anyway, all terribly exciting stuff. Right. And here we are at the end of Russian movement on turn 5, which is 7 p.m, January 29th, 1814. Right. Let's see what the Russians have been up to. Well, there was no problems with command. Everybody was in command. And yes, there have been developments. So we take a look down here. We can see that now the the Uhlans have stopped skirmishing, and they've taken a position in the line, as it were. So now they're a linear unit of light cavalry. Okay, so they don't have as much punch as something like this brigade of hussars, as we might imagine. That they basically got half as much punch, if I remember correctly. They can melee with a 4 dice, and they would melee with 2 dice. Okay. Let's see, what else have we got? Then the Cossacks have just sort of positioned themselves there. Well, as we can see, because, well, they're there, actually. And also the artillery has wheeled itself up, and also even the skirmishers are getting in on the act. They're not actually shooting at anything yet. They're too far away, but they're just sort of like there to make themselves available. The cavalry itself, what it did was it did a free facing change. They all moved back slightly, then paid for the facing change and just faced the enemy. And what they've done is they've put themselves out of visual range of the enemy. So that means, because if they hadn't, if they were still within, let's see, let's think this through. Yeah, if they'd stayed where they were, that's right, if they'd stayed where they were, the French in their turn could have chosen to go stationary, and then instead of firing at them with 3 dice, they would have been firing at them with 5 dice. So they weren't going to let them do that, so they've moved back. So therefore, if the French want to continue their attack and fire at them again, they're going to have to move forward, so that gives them no opportunity to go stationary. So they're just sort of inching back slowly. And time is the key thing. If they can just sort of soak up that time, then the French won't be able to get involved in going down this way and cutting off the line of communication, or even helping take the town of Brienne le Château. Right, or the chateau itself. Right, so they've sort of done that. Right, over here, the Cossacks decided, they're very brave lads, and what they've decided to do is to stay there so that they're in the way of this artillery. It means this artillery hasn't got a hope of being able to fire on the cavalry here in terms of its arc of fire and its sort of corridor of fire, because they're in the way. So they reformed from disorder, and they basically stayed where they were. Okay. Over here, not much going on. Oh, this battalion of artillery has become stationary. This one couldn't, because this one belongs to his division, which is exhausted, and an exhausted division's units can never become stationary. Same thing applies to these chaps here. Although they're not disordered, but they're in a exhausted division, so they can't become stationary. They also, plucky chaps, they've decided to stay there. And there's every chance they're going to take it on the chin from all this stuff that's pointed at them. But They do have 3 dice because they have those battalion guns. So even though they're not stationary, they've got 3 dice. They're going to aim those at them again, hoping to make some sort of dent in this unit here before they're seen off. Now, the thing is, of course, they are within close range of the artillery here, so that means they will have to take a morale test. They will also, over here, have to take a morale test. Nobody's actually in contact, so I think those are the only 2 morale tests that have to... Yeah, because they're not taking it because they're not within the firing arc of the artillery, so it's just the Cossacks there and the musketeers here. Pretty much everywhere else, the units are already in positions that the Russian commander wants them to be in. So, let's see, this unit here, for example, all those units there, and this artillery here just stayed where it was. It's getting very congested here. I mean, obviously, we can see the Russians have got... They've got 1, 2, 3, 4 artillery units which are not firing, which is not good. Need to get them into position so they can be firing, but it's a bit congested, and you also got the big problem of command control now, because in order to stay within the command of their divisional leader, their divisional commander, excuse me. So here, for example, this artillery, well, of course, that artillery is in a handy place, you know, getting ready for the enemy to approach and all that sort of thing. But, you know, you might have thought, you might look at this and sort of think, well, why don't you take the artillery there and have it just sort of like hot-footed over here? It might be useful down there somewhere. But the problem is that that belongs to Division 15. And, yeah, so, and Division 15 is here and here. You might say, well, wait a minute, isn't it out of command? No, it's not, because you've got right there, you've got the army commander, and it's right next. So the army commander and the artillery battalion, I suppose, could take themselves for a run over here. Yes, that could be done. The army commander can't, what can't he do? He can't rally routers, because nobody can be rallied now that it's night time. So that would give a special role to Blucher, I suppose. So, that's an interesting idea. We'll have to think about that. Right, so that means next up is the morale test. So there'll be the morale test there because they're within close range of the enemy and in shooting arc. And the same thing goes here. So, sorry, well, of course, close range and it being nighttime, they're also within visibility as well. They're within 200 yards of the guns there. So we'll go ahead and sort out those. As we can see, both units are not disordered. So if they fail their morale test, they will become disordered. Now, of course, we've got the Cossacks here, which are a morale of 4, but it's nighttime, so they're on a morale of 3. And if you roll more than that, they become disordered. So 4, 5, or 6 has them disordered. And they have become disordered. Right, so let's do that live and on camera. This is so exciting. I mean, you know. So once again... Point the camera in the right place, Jeff. There we go. Once again, the Cossacks are disordered. Okay. And then we have... oh, gosh. What's he? Poltorotsky? Is that his name? Poltorotsky. I remembered his name. Yes. Poltorotsky's brigade here. So they're testing because they're within the close range of the guns. Right, so they've got a morale of 5. They are not being fired on their flank anymore, so they would just drop them down to a 4 because of nighttime. So they will only fail on a 5 or a 6. And they failed. Oh, that's not good. Yes, we knew that could happen. There was a 1 in 3 chance of that happening. All right, let me find some more markers. There we go. His old pivotal Poltorotsky, as the chaps call him in the barracks or in the officers' mess. Yes, disordered now, you see. Right, so we've done the morale tests. So now we are on to combat. So let's get the shooting dice out and see what we can do. And there we have it. Yes, this whole night vision thing, you know, 200 yards maximum visibility is certainly a huge factor. Right, as we might imagine. Well, you know, you're running around in the dark. I mean, what do you expect? Okay, so we've got to, just to go through what we've got then. They're close range. They're hitting on a 4, 5, or a 6. They're close range, hitting on a 4, 5, or a 6. That's a massed infantry brigade that is not stationary. So we normally fire with 2 dice, but they got battalion guns, so they're firing with 3 dice. And that is a infantry brigade that is not stationary, so it's firing with 2 dice. They hit on 6s and they hit on 6s. Okay, so I'm not sure it matters a whole lot which we do first, but let's have the Russians. I mean, it's all simultaneous, of course. No, it's not simultaneous. Is it simultaneous? Yeah, in the individual sort of duel it is, yeah. So everyone is firing here, for example, would be firing simultaneously. They can't sort of eliminate them and then they don't get to fire back. No, of course not. So anyway, so that's how the Russians fire. So they've got 3 dice there with their battalion guns. Very spiffy battalion guns there. Marvellous. And but of course now they're disordered. So that means it's basically half as effective. We still roll 3 dice, but every one of them gets a saving throw, which means it's 50-50. So here we go. Russians going in, shooting away, and they have managed to get no hits. So we won't worry about the saving throws. No 6s there. Sunshine. So, right, the French fire back. There we are. Here we go. Oh my goodness, would you look at that? 1 in 36 chance. They've scored 2 hits, which has completely eliminated poor old Paul Torotsky. Yep. 2 hits on him. Right, we'll record that. Well, we also have to roll for division collapse as well, because if we roll 2 or... what is it? 2 or less, yes. Morale will collapse. Of course, the only thing left in that division is the artillery, right? Anyway, so let's see. Do we... yeah, you record... it's the losses you took, not the number of hits that there were on the unit. So that means if they were to fire on them and hit them again, I mean, oh, dude, what the heck? But if they were, it wouldn't make any difference. Well, they missed anyway, so there we go. That clears that up. Right, so over here, 4, 5, or a 6 is a hit. Let's see what they can do to the Cossacks. And if I recall correctly, the Cossacks, being these linear light cavalry units, have a strength point of 1. So 1 hit is all it takes. 4, 5, or a 6. And there it is. Okay, I'll just check on that.